Hey guys, so we are starting chapter 8, and in this chapter, this is about the high and late Middle Ages. It's 1050 to 1450 AD. And we're actually going to focus on some not so great things that are going to happen during this time period in this chapter. But there are a few things that we need to do leading up to those bad things so they make a little more sense. So in our last chapter, we talked about how the lords, the very powerful lords, exchanged land for military service. And in some cases, this actually made them more powerful than some of the kings that were in the area. In this chapter, we're going to see that royalty, the kings and queens, are actually going to gain a lot of that power back. And so this is titled Royal Power Changes. We're going to start, our very first guy that we're going to talk about is named William the Conqueror. So William is actually going to come to power in kind of an unusual way. So what actually happens is there is a king in England. His name is Edward, and Edward is going to die. And when he dies, he does not have any heirs. He does not have any kids. He does not have any grandsons, nobody like that. So this leaves the monarchy in a little bit of turmoil because, as you know, generally kings and queens are passed on through the bloodline from the fathers down to the oldest sons. So this is going to actually create some issues. First of all, there is somebody named Harold, that is Edward's brother-in-law, and the council, who's kind of working with the king, they actually name him to be the next ruler. They're like his brother-in-law. He's sort of the next in line-ish, I guess. So they name him. However, William, who actually lives in France, he says that he is related to King Edward, but I don't really know how. I'm not sure he knew how. And he claims that he was actually promised the throne by Edward. So now we've got two people competing for the throne. We've got William, who claims that he was promised the throne by Edward, and we have Harold, who is sort of kind of related because he's a brother-in-law, so kind of by marriage. And so, of course, we can't just, settle this. It's going to go to war, which is probably where the name William the Conqueror is going to come from. So William is going to actually raise an army. He will sail across the English Channel into England. So remember, he's from France, so he's a French guy going to become king in England. Very confusing. And in the end, he actually defeats Harold rather easily. And on Christmas Day in 1066, what a great Christmas present, he becomes King of England. So not such a bad gift, right? You can't really beat that. Merry Christmas, you're king. You're not going to be able to top that gift next year. So while he is king, he is going to significantly increase the power of the monarchy. One of the things he's going to do is the land. So he will continue the process of dividing up the land amongst the lords. He will keep a lot of that land for himself. I want you guys to keep in mind that land equals power, particularly during this time period. Land shows your wealth, and the wealthier that you were, the more land you had, the more powerful you were. So that's definitely a big deal for him to be keeping that land. He also, as he gives land out to vassals, he's sort of skipping over the powerful lords. So it would be like Mrs. Krebs skipping over Mr. Fuller in our example that we used in going straight to the teachers. And then the teachers, instead of pledging loyalty to Mr. Fuller, would sort of skip him and go straight to the king or queen. And so this is also going to make him powerful because it means there's a whole lot of people pledging loyalty to him. So not only is he going to increase power these are all the ways he's going to increase power, but keeping land for himself, but also giving manors to the vassals. Unfortunately, the manor system does still exist a little bit in this chapter, so you guys are kind of still peasants. Sorry about that. The vassals, in turn, of course, promised to serve in his military. So while he had a rather powerful military that he had raised in France, this is going to obviously increase that power because now he has even more people who are trained and are willing to fight for him. So another thing that he does is create or conduct a massive census of the land. Of course, we talked about census before. Census is a population count. His census actually listed every single castle, field, and pig pen in England. So he really wants to know a count of everything. He knows every livestock that people own. He knows not only the people, but their fields and what they're growing. This was a gigantic undertaking. This was actually called the Doomsday Book. So it looks like Domesday on here, but it's pronounced Doomsday. Basically, they called it that because it was like saying how you can't escape doomsday when the end of the world comes. You couldn't really escape his counting. He was going to find out everything that you had. Of course, he's using this for tax purposes because he wants to make sure that he is getting everything that he needs. Now, his successors, the people who come after him, continue to use the process in the Doomsday Book. This creates a treasury, the people who are in charge of collecting taxes. So all of the people after him will use this process to actually count people so that they can collect taxes, fees, fines, the whole 9 yards. So he starts that, which makes him really, really powerful, way more powerful than what we saw in the previous chapter. So our second guy we're going to talk about actually doesn't come directly after William. He's not going to come until about 100 years later. His name is Henry. Henry is also going to increase power for the monarchy. Henry is kind of an interesting guy because he was very energetic. He was very well educated and believed that he could create a better system. He really believed in the things that he puts into place. So one of the first things he does is something called common law. Basically, common law means it applies the same to everybody. So previously, if you were a peasant, you might have very different consequences to your actions than somebody who was, say, in the nobility, somebody who was wealthy. There are, of course, people who argue that this is the same as it is today, that rich people get off easier when they commit crimes than us normal people. That definitely happened for sure. They actually had, like, legally a different set of rules for the peasants and the wealthier people. So he's going to create common law, says it should apply the same to everybody. He also believes, and this one's kind of interesting, that clergymen, so people who run the church services, that they should be put into, if they break the law, they need to go into court like everybody else. Previously, what was happening was the church would sort of take care of those problems themselves. So if they had a clergy person who did something wrong, they would be like, oh, don't worry, we'll take care of it. We have our own court system inside the church. And oftentimes, whatever was happening, corruption, remember we talked about the popes, like taking money from the people and wearing jewelry and things like that. That stuff usually got just sort of shoved under the rug, and nothing ever happened. And so Henry thinks that that's not okay. He says that clergy should be able to be put on trial in a regular court system. And along with this, as he's creating all of these different new places on the law, they also come up with the jury trial, which of course we use today. This means that you've got a group of people that are your peers who are going to basically determine if you are innocent or guilty. Instead of just having one person. So one person who could be tampered with or could put their own bias into a situation. Now you have to have a group of people. And Henry's going to start that process. Now, while this is happening, it turns out that Henry actually has a really good friend who is a clergy person. He is an archbishop. His name is Thomas Becket. And Thomas Becket, Archbishop of a place called Canterbury. And over the years, they sort of go back and forth on this whole thing about whether or not the clergy should be put on trial. Of course, Thomas Becket is a member of the clergy, belongs to the church. He says, no, we got this. We take care of our own things. We don't need your regular court system. Save that for normal people. The clergy take care of ourselves. And of course, Henry disagrees with that. He's like, yeah, you take care of yourselves. You don't do anything when people do things wrong. So they go back and forth, even though they're friends. Turns out they can disagree with each other on things and still be friends. And so in the process, they continue to go back and forth. And at one time, they go out to dinner together and they get into a really heated argument about this subject. And they leave, and both of them are really upset. And so he's sitting on his throne. I just can picture him like, he's so distraught. He's leaning over and it's just, and he's talking to some of his knights, and he's like, I don't understand why he can't see things my way. We know we're doing things for the better of the people. And so basically, while this is going on, he's talking to these knights, and at one point he gets so frustrated and he just yells out loud, who will rid me of this meddlesome priest? And a couple of his knights are like, me, I got this. And so several of his knights actually go to the archbishop's church and they murder him right there in his very own church. Of course, Henry denies that he told them to do that. He says he was just speaking out of anger and they totally did that on their own. And so nothing ever happens to Henry, but his friend gets murdered. That sucks, right? So this is going to show that it doesn't really come down to fixing the matter, but the archbishop does get killed. So then our next guy actually does come right after Henry because it's his son. So this is King John. King John, not very good. He is the only one out of these that is actually going to lose power for the monarchy. And that's probably because of the kind of person he was. He was rather self-centered, and while he was very, very clever, he was very cruel of the way that he handled things and the way that he treated people. Your book, I think, describes him as being an untrustworthy leader, which is clearly not a good thing. You should be able to trust your leaders. So during his reign, he is going to create basically two very, very powerful enemies. The first one is going to be the Pope. His name is Pope Innocent II. And the second one are actually his own nobles. So he's actually going to have problems with both the church and his own nobles while this is going on. So way back, if you remember, on the first guy we talked about, he came from France. He goes into England and takes the land. And so basically, we're going to see that there was some land that was taken over around the same time by the English. And so they basically are now in France. The French are in England. It's very confusing where the land and where the borders actually were. John is going to battle with the Pope over the land. Because remember, the Pope, we said, was like all powerful over even the kings and the queens. So they're going to have problems with that. Pope Innocent is going to choose a new archbishop, and King John is going to be like, I disagree with this choice, and says that he's not going to agree to it. And then basically the Pope kicks him out. He excommunicates him. So that's basically some problem. Now, it really, oh my gosh, it gets to the point where not only does he excommunicate him, he threatens to excommunicate every single person in England if John doesn't back down and allow his appointment to go through. So if you are somebody in England who's basically being told you're not going to be able to go to heaven because of the king, you're going to get really upset about that. So eventually he does back down on that one. He also is going to treat his royals very, very poorly, or rather his nobles. So it gets to the point where his very own people, his nobles, he is taxing by a lot. Like he's really just trying to make money off of them. And then he treats some of them badly. He takes land from some of